Golden Ember was alive with its usual rhythm, glasses clinking, muffled conversations, the occasional burst of laughter from a corner booth. Tyler had worked here for 3 years, long enough to memorize the restaurant's heartbeat. Tonight, though, something was off. It wasn't the food, the service, or even the music humming softly from the speakers. It was the customers. They weren't the usual blend of businessmen, socialites, and out-of-towners looking for an extravagant meal. They were watching more than they were eating. Conversations were shorter, glances sharper, and Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that the entire room was waiting for something to happen. He was clearing a table near the entrance when he saw her. The woman hovered just outside the glass doors, her hands gripping the straps of a large, worn-out bag. She looked frail, hesitant, out of place against the restaurant's polished gold and marble aesthetic. Tyler recognized her. She'd been outside a few times before, standing just beyond the entrance, peering in as if debating whether to step inside. But tonight, for the first time, she did. Heads turned the moment she crossed the threshold. Her clothes were clean but old, the fabric faded from years of wear. The maitre d' Martin barely concealed his disapproval as he greeted her. "Good evening, ma'am. Do you have a reservation?" The woman, Rose, as Tyler would later learn, cleared her throat. "No, I was hoping to just have a meal." A hesitation. Then Martin plastered on the polite yet dismissive smile he reserved for guests who didn't fit Golden Ember's clientele. "Of course, right this way." He led her to a small, tucked-away table in the back, as far from the main floor as possible. Tyler caught the exchange and felt something tighten in his chest. The usual unwritten rules of fine dining were in play. Keep the undesirables out of sight. Still, Rose seemed relieved just to have a seat. She picked up the menu with trembling hands, eyes scanning the elegant script. Tyler continued working, but he kept an eye on her. She wasn't ordering. She wasn't even calling for a waiter. She just sat there, staring at the menu, flipping pages as if trying to decipher a foreign language. Then it happened. As she shifted her bag to make room on the table, the strap caught the edge of a server's tray. The plate, a delicate imported ceramic dish holding an artfully plated entree, tilted dangerously. It crashed onto the floor. The entire restaurant went silent. Rose froze, eyes wide with horror. The server, caught off guard, muttered a sharp curse under his breath. A murmur rippled through the room. People exchanged looks, some amused, some annoyed. Martin was on her in seconds. "Ma'am, please be careful," he said, his voice tight with forced patience. I'm so sorry," she stammered, reaching for her bag, as if she could somehow undo what had happened. Then her breath hitched, a shallow gasp, then another. Her fingers clenched around the bag's strap, her body going rigid. Tyler didn't need to think. He knew what was happening. He'd seen it before. She was having an asthma attack. "Someone get help!" A voice, maybe Martin, barked out the order, but no one moved. Guests shrank back, hesitant. Servers exchanged unsure glances. Tyler moved. He was at her side in seconds. "Ma'am, do you have an inhaler?" She nodded weakly, her lips parting as she struggled for breath. "Bag," she rasped. He dug through the worn-out bag, past crumpled receipts, a neatly folded scarf, and then, there. The small plastic device buried deep. He pulled it out, popped off the cap, and gently pressed it into her shaking hands. "Deep breath," he coached. "Slow. There you go." She inhaled, pressing down on the inhaler. Once, twice. The tension in her body slowly eased. The whole room was watching. Brian, the restaurant manager, stormed over. "What the hell is going on?" His eyes flicked from Rose, still recovering, to the broken plate, then to Tyler. "She couldn't breathe," Tyler said, still crouched beside her. Brian exhaled sharply, his frustration barely contained. "We cannot have a scene like this in the middle of service." "She had a medical emergency," Tyler shot back. "I don't care if she was on fire," Brian snapped. "This is not the kind of attention we want. She needs to leave." Tyler's jaw clenched. He looked at Rose, pale, still catching her breath, and knew exactly what Brian saw. A problem to be removed. "She's not going anywhere until she's okay," Tyler said, standing up. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. "Tyler," Brian said, his voice low and dangerous. "If you don't step away, you're done here." Tyler knew what that meant. He needed this job. Rent wasn't going to pay itself. He'd worked his ass off to get to a restaurant like this, to build a reputation. But then he looked at Rose, small, exhausted, still gripping the inhaler like it was the only thing tethering her to this moment. He made his choice. "I'll stay with her," he said. "Do what you have to do." Brian didn't hesitate. "You're fired." Tyler swallowed, nodded once and turned back to Rose. "Let's get you some water," he said softly. Golden Ember buzzed with whispers as Tyler led her toward the exit, the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. He had no job, no plan, but somehow he felt lighter than he had in years. Tyler woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing. And buzzing. And buzzing. For a split second, he thought it was Brian calling to give him his job back, not out of remorse, but because he'd realized how short-staffed the restaurant was without him. But when Tyler grabbed his phone and squinted at the screen, it wasn't just one call. It was dozens of notifications, texts, missed calls, social media alerts piling up so fast his phone lagged trying to load them all. His heart pounded as he scrolled through the chaos. City News. Viral video shows restaurant manager firing waiter after he helps elderly woman having medical emergency. Food Insider. Is this the worst restaurant manager in the city? Golden Ember faces backlash after shocking video surfaces. And random user 999. Yo, this dude deserves a raise, not to get fired. Who is he? Someone hire him ASAP. Tyler blinked. His name wasn't in the posts, but the video was everywhere. Someone had recorded the entire thing. The broken plate, Rose gasping for air, Tyler rushing to help her while everyone else just watched. The clip cut off right as Brian fired him. Comments were flooding in. People were furious. He barely had time to process it before his phone rang again. He almost didn't answer, but when he saw the name on the screen, his stomach twisted. Maya. His best friend, the only person who'd stuck by him through every struggle. She'd been pushing him to quit Golden Ember for months, saying he deserved better. Now, technically, he had quit, just not in the way either of them had planned. Tyler. Holy shit. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. You saw it, huh? The whole city saw it, she shot back. You're trending, I mean really trending. People are pissed at Golden Ember. Their Yelp is on fire, their Instagram comments are a war zone, and their reservations, tanking. Tyler sat up. Wait, seriously? Oh yeah. The internet loves a villain, and Brian just handed them a perfect one. But, dude, she hesitated. Are you okay? He exhaled slowly. I think so. It's just a lot. A pause, then softer. Do you regret it? Tyler thought about Rose, how scared she'd looked, how relieved she'd been when she could finally breathe again. He thought about Brian's face, about the sharp finality of, "You're fired." "No," he said. "I don't." "Good." Maya's tone turned smug. "Because you might have just lost your job, but you gained something way bigger." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "Check your DMs." Tyler opened Instagram, expecting the usual spam. Instead, his inbox was flooded. Among the chaos, strangers thanking him, people offering job leads, one message stood out. A hospital address. A short note. "Rose Carter wants to see you." Tyler's breath caught. Maya's voice came through the phone. "I don't know who she is, but I think you should go." He didn't hesitate. "Yeah," he said. "I think I should too." The hospital was quieter than he expected, the steady beep of monitors filling the space. A nurse led him to Rose's room, where she sat propped up against pillows, looking stronger than she had the night before. She smiled when she saw him. "Tyler," he stepped closer. "How are you feeling?" "Oh, much better, thanks to you." She gestured to the chair beside her bed. "Come, sit." He did. She studied him for a moment before speaking again. "I saw the video," she said. Tyler tensed. "Yeah, It kinda blew up. She chuckled. That's an understatement. But that's not why I asked you to come. He frowned. Then why? Rose glanced toward the door as if expecting someone. A second later, a man walked in. He was older, maybe mid-60s, with silver hair and a presence that instantly filled the room. He carried himself like someone who was used to being listened to. Rose reached for his hand. Tyler, this is my husband, Edward Carter. Tyler stood automatically, shaking his hand. Edward's grip was firm, his eyes sharp. I've been wanting to meet you, Edward said. Tyler hesitated. Why? Edward sat beside Rose's bed. Because you're the only person who did the right thing last night. Rose's expression softened. Tyler, there's something you should know about me. About us. Tyler frowned, glancing between them. What do you mean? Rose took a breath. We run a foundation, she said. It helps people, those who've been overlooked, shut out, left behind. And last night, I was running an experiment. Tyler blinked. An experiment? Rose nodded. I wanted to see how a place like Golden Ember would treat someone who didn't fit in. She sighed. I expected the judgment, the stares, but the asthma attack, that wasn't planned. Tyler's stomach twisted. So, wait, you chose to go there to test them? Yes, Edward answered, but we never expected you. Tyler ran a hand through his hair, his mind spinning. So, what now? Rose smiled. Now, she said, we make you an offer. Tyler leaned forward, still trying to process Rose's words. An offer, he repeated, glancing between her and Edward. Edward nodded. We think you'd be a perfect fit for our foundation. Tyler blinked. Wait. What? Rose chuckled. I know it sounds sudden, but hear us out. She paused, choosing her words carefully. You saw what happened last night. The way people treated me the moment I walked in. The assumptions they made. Tyler nodded. He had seen it. Hell, he'd spent years in that restaurant watching people like Rose get turned away, dismissed, treated as invisible. Edward leaned forward. We've spent our lives trying to help people who are overlooked. Our foundation provides training and job opportunities for those struggling to find a way back into the workforce. Homeless individuals, ex-convicts, single parents who were forced to drop out of school, people society tends to write off. He tilted his head. You ever worked with anyone like that, Tyler? Tyler hesitated. Not directly, but... He thought about some of the kitchen staff at Golden Ember, a few line cooks who had rough pasts, a dishwasher who used to live out of his car before getting hired. The people who worked the hardest were often the ones no one ever talked about. Rose studied him. We saw something in you last night. You didn't hesitate. You didn't ask if I could afford to be there. You just helped. That's rare, Tyler. He exhaled, running a hand over his face. I don't even know what you guys do exactly. What would working for you mean? Edward smiled. It means helping people like you always have, except on a bigger scale. Instead of working at one restaurant, you'd be helping hundreds of people get a second chance in the industry. Tyler hesitated. I don't know if I'm qualified for something like that. Rose shook her head. You don't need experience. You need heart. And you've already proven you have that. Tyler let their words sink in. It was tempting. More than tempting. After what happened at Golden Ember, he wasn't sure he wanted to work in another high-end restaurant. But this was different. He took a breath. Can I think about it? Edward nodded. Of course, take a few days. He pulled out a card and handed it to Tyler. That's my number. Call me when you're ready. Tyler tucked the card into his pocket and stood. Thank you, both of you. Rose smiled warmly. No, Tyler, thank you. Tyler stepped out of the hospital, the cool air biting against his skin. He should have felt lighter, relieved even, but his head was spinning. This morning, he'd woken up unemployed. Now he had a job offer, a completely different kind of job, one that could actually change lives. His phone buzzed again. He expected another flood of notifications, but this time, it was just one message. Brian, call me. We need to talk. Tyler's stomach twisted. He should have ignored it. He wanted to ignore it, but something in him was curious. With a sigh, he tapped the call button. Brian answered immediately. Tyler. Yeah. His voice was flat. What do you want? A beat of silence. Then, come back. Tyler almost laughed. Excuse me? We'll give you your job back, Brian said quickly, like he was rushing to get the words out. Not just that. We'll promote you. Supervisor position. More pay. Tyler's grip tightened on the phone. You fired me 24 hours ago. Brian exhaled sharply. That was a mistake. Oh, you think? Tyler shot back. You humiliated me in front of the whole staff, hell, the whole restaurant, because I helped someone who needed it. Look, I get it, Brian said, his voice strained. But we're in damage control. The restaurant's taking a hit. People are canceling reservations. The owners are pissed, and corporate is breathing down my neck. This is me making things right. Tyler scoffed. No, this is you trying to fix your mess. Another silence. Just come in, let's talk. Tyler stared at the sidewalk, something cold settling in his chest. No, he said. Brian faltered. Tyler, I'm not coming back, Brian. And honestly, I don't think you deserve to stay either. He ended the call before Brian could respond. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was in control. He pulled Edward's card from his pocket, running his fingers over the embossed letters. He already knew what he was going to do. Tyler hadn't been this nervous in a long time. He stood outside the Carter Foundation's main office, a modest but well-kept building in the heart of the city. It wasn't flashy. No marble floors, no gold-trimmed menus, just a simple, welcoming space with the foundation's name printed in clean, bold letters on the door. He exhaled, then stepped inside. The lobby was nothing like Golden Ember, no hushed, pretentious atmosphere. Instead, there was warmth, soft chatter, the smell of fresh coffee, a receptionist who actually smiled when he walked in. Tyler? A familiar voice called his name. He turned to see Rose, looking far better than she had in the hospital. She approached with a kind smile, moving slower than most, but carrying a presence that made her impossible to ignore. You came, she said, pleased. Tyler nodded. Yeah, figured I owed you at least a conversation. Rose chuckled. I have a feeling this'll be more than a conversation. She gestured for him to follow. As they walked, Tyler took in the space. Open workstations, people moving with purpose. Some dressed in business casual, others in kitchen uniforms. A training area had been set up in the back, where a group of people were practicing plating dishes under the watchful eye of an instructor. Rose caught his glance. We offer hospitality training, she explained. A lot of the people here come from difficult backgrounds. Some were homeless, some were recently incarcerated. Others just never had a chance to build real job experience. We teach them the skills they need, then help place them in jobs. Tyler nodded slowly. He'd worked in restaurants long enough to know that for some people, one opportunity could mean the difference between making it and barely surviving. Rose led him into an office where Edward was waiting. He stood as they entered, shaking Tyler's hand. Glad you decided to come. Tyler took a seat across from them. I'm not saying yes yet, he warned. Edward smiled. Understood. Rose leaned forward. Tell me, Tyler, what do you really want? That question had been rattling around in his head since the moment he walked out of Golden Ember. For years, his goal had been simple. Climb the ranks in fine dining, maybe one day run a place of his own. But now, that ambition felt hollow. What did he want? He thought about Rose gasping for air while people just watched, about Brian's cold dismissal, about how he'd spent years serving people who didn't even bother to learn his name. Then he thought about the people here, the ones in the kitchen practicing their craft, the ones who had been ignored, overlooked, just like Rose had been that night. I don't know, he admitted. Rose smiled. Then maybe this is the perfect place to figure it out. Edward slid a folder across the table. We're launching a new program, one specifically designed to help people get placed in higher-end restaurants like the one you just left, a way to change the industry from the inside. Tyler flipped through the pages. It outlined structured training, mentorship, direct job placements. It was smart. and it had the potential to be huge. Rose's voice was gentle but firm. "We want you to run it." Tyler looked up sharply. "Me?" Edward nodded. "You have experience in fine dining. You understand how the industry works, and more importantly, you care. That's what makes the difference." Tyler exhaled. "I've never run anything like this before." "You didn't hesitate to take charge when it mattered most," Rose said. "You already have the instincts." He stared at the papers, his mind racing. This wasn't just a job. This was a chance to actually do something. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He closed the folder and met their eyes. "I'm in." Tyler had always thought change took time, that shifting the way people saw the world, or each other, was slow, painstaking work. But in just a few weeks, he realized something else. Change happens the moment someone decides to make it happen, and he had decided. The Carter Foundation's new hospitality program launched with a small group, 10 trainees, each with a different story. There was Luis, who had spent 5 years in prison and couldn't get past the first round of job interviews. Nia, a single mother who had aged out of foster care and never had formal work experience. Deshawn, a former line cook who lost everything when medical bills buried him in debt. Tyler trained them himself, teaching them everything he had learned from years in fine dining: how to navigate a high-pressure kitchen, how to deal with demanding guests, how to hold their own in an industry that thrived on exclusivity. But he wasn't just teaching them how to survive in restaurants, he was showing them how to belong. The program picked up traction faster than anyone expected. News outlets covered their work, local restaurants expressed interest, and before long Tyler found himself sitting in meetings with restaurant owners who, just months ago, wouldn't have given people like his trainees a second glance. And then, the last person Tyler expected reached out. Brian. The message was short, almost hesitant. "We should talk." Tyler debated ignoring it, but something in him wanted to hear what Brian had to say, so, against his better judgment, he agreed to meet. They sat across from each other at a coffee shop, the air thick with unspoken tension. Brian looked different, less sure of himself, more tired. Tyler folded his arms. "So, what do you want?" Brian exhaled. "The restaurant's in trouble." Tyler smirked. "Yeah, I saw the Yelp reviews." Brian flinched. "Look, I messed up. I handled that night all wrong." Tyler raised an eyebrow. "That night?" Brian's jaw tightened. "Fine. I've handled a lot of things wrong, but the owners are on my ass, customers are still pissed, and we need to do something before the restaurant completely tanks." He hesitated, then finally admitted, "I need your help." Tyler leaned back. "You fired me in front of the entire restaurant. Now you want me to save your ass?" Brian's expression darkened, but he didn't argue. "I'm not asking you to come back. I know that ship sailed." He exhaled. "But I heard about your program, and I think we can work together." Tyler blinked, caught off guard. "You want Golden Ember to be part of the program?" Brian nodded. "We bring in some of your trainees, give them a shot. The restaurant needs new staff, and honestly, we need a new image." Tyler studied him. "Are you doing this because you actually believe in it, or because you're desperate?" Brian held his gaze. "Does it matter?" Tyler considered that. Maybe Brian wasn't a good person yet. Maybe he never would be. But if this program could get people hired, if it could force Golden Ember to change, then maybe that was enough. Finally, he nodded. "Fine, we'll try it, but on my terms." Brian didn't argue. He just extended his hand. Tyler shook it. Months later, Tyler stood in Golden Ember watching as Luis moved seamlessly through the dining room, balancing a tray of drinks with the confidence of someone who belonged. The restaurant had changed, the people working here had changed, and so had Tyler. He wasn't a waiter anymore. He wasn't chasing a title in fine dining. He was building something bigger. The Carter Foundation's hospitality program expanded. More restaurants joined. More people got second chances. Tyler had started out just trying to do the right thing. And in the process, he had changed an industry. He had changed lives, and somehow, along the way, he had changed his own.